Surprise! The Hirogen are back. I guess they weren't joking when they said their hunts took them far and wide. They're engaged in one now from the looks of things, though seemingly also a lesson for the younger of the two. A flash of uniform indicates they're hunting Starfleet, though the teal-coloured shoulders combined with a full head of hair suggests it's not anybody we know or care about. The youngster's a bit overexcited, but only manages to kaboom a tree, earning himself an admonishment from his teacher. Noise from multiple directions suggests this isn't quite going the way the hunters had planned, perhaps having been flanked by their prey. Maybe Janeway's having a little fun with them. They move to the shore of a body of water, and I'll be honest here, kids, I went off on a bit of a tangent trying to track down exactly what it would be called. See, the problem is that bodies of water have only loose classifications, many of which overlap, and those can also be changed by the water itself being fresh water or salt water. You'd assume either lake or pond, there being no definitive data on what size constitutes each, but it could also be a marsh or swamp. As it's a film set, specifically the jungle set at Warner Brothers Burbank, if my research is correct, we could also assume it's artificial, which means it might be considered a reservoir or even a decorative water feature if we're being generous. This isn't helped by Warner Brothers themselves referring to it as both a pond and a lagoon. A lagoon, by the way, is technically defined as any body of water separated from a larger body of water by a barrier, which means it also includes ponds, lakes, swamps, marshes, reservoirs, decorative water features, a bath, and, depending upon your interpretation of the word water, your bladder. And all of the above is rendered irrelevant because the names of specific bodies of water can go back many centuries. If Jimmy Cockwhistle from 1282 called his pond a lake, then it's a lake. Basically, I'm saying water can go fuck itself. Whatever it is, it's also the hiding place of some Starfleet personnel, who jump up and poop the absolute buggery out of those Hirogen lads. They do a very dead, and we're treated to a shot of the group who ganked them, showing us that they're all new. Maybe this is what happens to all away teams that don't have a member of the regular cast in them. If they're missing from Voyager, nobody seems to give a shit. The Doc's asking for some time off as he's been invited to speak at a conference by six-legged aliens, ones we presumably met before the cameras were rolling, so we don't need expensive makeup or CGI. Bollocks to all that, though, as Chakotay's called to the bridge by Janeway. Somebody sent out a distress call, and it's on Hirogen frequencies. We pop over for a look and find a Hirogen station of some sort. Life sign readings are a bit weird, and it could be a setup, so Janeway obviously wants to go in and take a look around. Well, maybe not herself. She sends 4 faces we know and 1 we don't, which is potentially very shit news indeed for this guy right here. Things aren't dangerous enough yet, so let's split up. Tuvok, Paris and Deadmeat find 2 Hirogen corpses hidden by foliage, though not the 2 from earlier by the looks of things, as neither of them have red markings on their helmets. Seven and Chakotay have made a discovery too. Looks like the Hirogen aren't the only ones who enjoy murdering trees, as this one has a Klingon bat'leth buried in it, and one that's had some raspberry jam rubbed on it too. They also detect what looks like an injured Hirogen according to scans, but that doesn't stop the prick from pooping at them. The other team manages to flank him, perhaps helped by the filming crew that you can clearly see on the left-hand side of the shot. I wonder if they get credited for appearing in the episode. Tuvok takes care of the Hirogen, giving him the old Vulcan sleep massage. Paris notes he's been injured and teleports to Voyager with him, as Seven finds some tech behind a bush. It's Federation, and it's controls for a holodeck. The environment they're in is a simulation, but one that we weren't able to detect with our scans. Seven shuts it down to reveal both a large room and a shitload of dead Hirogen. It's clear the Hirogen have been dicking around with the holographic tech we gave them a few years back, making it able to fool sensors. Janeway thinks they also disabled the safeties, though based on our own experience, that might just be a thing that happened at random. The guy Tuvok knocked out is awake and a little bit agitated. As he's the only one to make it out alive, let's assume he's going to be staying for a while and pop a name on him. He'll now be known as S7E09, provided by Ensign Brian Williams. Sishi thinks this is all a simulation, and the fact that our Doctor is a hologram isn't helping. Janeway asks the doc to disable himself so we can have a proper chat, and after she introduces herself to Sishi, he recognizes the name. We're the ones who gave them holographic tech to begin with, after all. It turns out this was a training station, somewhere that new hunters go to learn, but the system started malfunctioning and the holograms turned off the safeties. I suspect there's a touch more to it based on the modifications the Hirogen have made, but that story does track with how reliable Voyager's holodecks are. The rest will have to wait, as there's a Hirogen ship incoming. They're letting their guns do the talking, which would probably be more effective if they weren't massively outclassed. Janeway gets bored with trying to call, and we kaboom them a bit until they decide that maybe they want to speak to us after all. They pop over to talk to S7E09 after Janeway refuses to teleport him to them. They're not impressed by learning he hid to survive, not helped by the fact that it was his job to keep the place running properly. And the cherry on top is that the holograms who did this managed to nick a ship with holo-emitters and Scarpa. To be fair, I'd argue that means Sishi did a great job of making competent opponents. The Hirogen are going after the holograms, and Janeway's managed to convince them to let us join. Her own crew isn't quite as easily convinced, Chakotay and Tuvok both deciding to have a word. They think we're not responsible for what the Hirogen did after we gave them the tech. Janeway respectfully listens, then respectfully ignores them. We might have been better off staying out of it. We catch up with the stolen ship, and the Hirogen barrel in without restraint. It's a bold move, and one that ends poorly when the ship reveals itself to be a bomb with a hologram around it. The Hirogen get proper fucked up, and we start teleporting them to Voyager, but there's a problem. The writers of this episode have decided not to ignore the whole shield prevent teleport thing, so we lower ours to bring the Hirogen aboard. But that leaves us defenseless when the real stolen ship starts pooping at us, and means we can't stop them from grabbing the dock and legging it. He's greeted by what can be best described as an eclectic group, though you could argue that they're a better model for interspecies cooperation than their biological counterparts. The boss, a Bajoran, assures the doc that he's safe. The doc wants to be returned, obviously, but Bajoran boss has need of him. You see, some of them are injured. Unfortunately, they need an engineer, not a doctor. The doc has a little experience in holo programming, though chooses not to admit that most of his alterations have been a complete bloody shambles. It's the best they've got anyway, so he has a go. Back on Voyager, S7E09 is explaining how their holographic systems work. They run on separate power supplies like ours, so if that goes offline, the problem sorts itself. That may not be as easy as it sounds, though. B'Elanna's been having a poke through their data and has discovered the Hirogen have done more than make the holograms full scanners. They've also made them smarter. The ones who went murder mode on the training station weren't a malfunction. They were working as intended, just a little more effectively than the Hirogen had anticipated, with the end result being a lot of dead Hirogen. That changes things, and Janeway's not willing to let the Hirogen dictate the plan anymore. She's still going to stop the holograms, but wants to do it from a safe distance, despite how much the Hirogen complain that this is a cowardly tactic. You'd think getting fucked up not once but twice would make them open to alternative approaches. And to make sure they don't bollocks it up any more than it already is, the Hirogen can stay under guard as our guests, while Mummy Janeway clears up their mess. The doc's treating patients as best he can, with the help of a cardigan who Bajoran boss liberated. He's impressed by her skills, and more so when he learns that she taught herself. He's less impressed by learning that the Hirogen gave their holograms the ability to feel pain to make them more enjoyable prey. Hardly surprising, then, that they rose up. Well, one of them. Bajoran boss had his fill of getting murdered for the lols, but being the favourite sport of a particularly skillful hunter comes with the bonus of having a few of those skills rubbing off on you. He managed to Scarpa through means we aren't told, though I think it's a fair bet that they involved the Hirogen in question not being around anymore. After meeting the holographic rebels from Body and Soul, which is a nice callback, he decided to try and help free more holograms from the Hirogen. He's clearly doing something right, as this was the third training station he's managed to shut down. The recruitment doesn't stop there, though. He thinks the doc's as much of a victim as he was. When the doc disagrees, and is a bit of a judgmental prick towards Bajoran boss to boot, Bajoran boss decides that maybe experiencing things for himself might make him understand. That's why he transfers memories to the doc of being hunted, injured, and murdered, all from the doc's viewpoint, and all without his consent. It's an interesting way to get him on board, and the Doc is as impressed by it being done to him as you might expect. Bajoran Boss is very insistent that he needs to understand what they've been through, though, and that desire may not be entirely practical. You see, the Hirogen based their holographic template on the Doctor, meaning that all those around him are, in a way, related to him. Either that or he's their messiah. The Doc's not delighted at what his spawn have become, what with the killing and all, but Bajoran Boss explains that none of them chose this way of life. In fact, they want to settle down and put all of this behind them. As a show of resignation, or possibly an attempt to convince him to help, Bajoran Boss orders the ship to return to Voyager, like the Doc asked. If it was the latter, it seems to have succeeded, as the Doc wants to hear more. Bajoran Boss and Cardigan Medic show him a gizmo that projects holograms. It's what they used to disguise the bomb from earlier, but they say they want to use it to set up home on a planet, believing that the Hirogen won't stop looking for the ship that they nicked. Unfortunately, the Doc can't help even if he wants to. Pasting bits of code over the corrupt sections in holograms who are damaged is one thing, but they're talking about creating an infrastructure that'll support tens or hundreds, maybe even thousands of individuals, along with the environment to house them. That's beyond him, but he says B'Elanna may be able to help. Bajoran Boss is strongly against the idea of involving organics, and Janeway in particular. Hardly surprising when you consider we're currently working with their oppressors, and that's before you remember that she started all of this to begin with. The Doc tries to convince him of Janeway's intent, saying she's largely responsible for the rights he has on Voyager. I'd argue that's only because Kez pointed out her ignorance, but I guess it's technically true. Bajoran Boss sounds like he's warming to the idea of cooperation, but his interest in B'Elanna specifically leaves me suspicious that there's going to be a kidnapping in the near future. Back on Voyager, we're having another briefing on a different idea to disable the holograms on the stolen ship. We can do a science wibbly to bugger up the emitters, but it'll take a while to set up. We aren't told if the effect would be temporary or permanent. We might find out shortly. The hologram ship is approaching and Janeway gets ready for some fisticuffs. A call from the Doc prevents Poopage, explaining that they're here to talk. Well, he is anyway. It looks as though he's been elected as an ambassador, though that may be a logistical matter as the briefing room doesn't have holo emitters. His argument that Bajoran Boss and company only want a few technological odds and sods so they can bugger off and live in peace fails to convince Janeway. This is all happening as a result of her handing out tech to begin with, something she now seems to consider an error. Sishi Runak saying the holograms are programmed to be violent little bastards probably doesn't help, though I'd argue he's not exactly an impartial witness in all this. Janeway declines the proposal, and we start an argument about holographic rights that threatens to go somewhere interesting, so let's shut it down. Neelix has been taken hostage in the mess hall, and instead of just letting him die, Paris orders the guards to drop their weapons. I'm not quite sure why the driver has authority over security personnel, but let's ignore that for now. Oddly enough, disarming instead of just stunning everybody and sorting it out later goes poorly for them, and the ensuing fight gives one of the Hirogen a chance to send out a signal to other ships. Quite why Neelix's cooker connects to the communications array isn't explained, but let's ignore that too. Tuvok arrives and decides the best defense is a good shooting someone in the tits. We stop the Hirogen behind the oven, but not before he's able to finish sending that message. We'll have a couple of Hirogen ships arriving in about an hour. That should give Janeway a chance to use the science wibbly and shut down the holograms. The Doc, who's on the bridge for some reason, is obviously a bit surprised by this decision. Janeway doesn't usually turn on innocent third parties begging for help unless they're wearing a Starfleet uniform. She's at least giving them a call first and asking them to transfer to Voyager's computer while we sort all this out. Sounds a lot like surrender to Bajoran Boss, and he's got a fair point. His skepticism isn't helped by Janeway saying that she has the means to do this by force if necessary, so he hangs up and tries to scarp her. The Doc attempts to convince Janeway to rethink things, and she tells him to shut the fuck up and leave. He's so upset by what's going on that he takes matters into his own hands and gives Bajoran Boss a call. He's giving them both data on the science wibbly so they can defend against it, and information on Voyager's shield so they can teleport the Doc back over. It would appear Bajoran Boss has a new recruit. Bajoran Boss has given his word that he won't use the shield data to fuck up Voyager, and to be fair to the guy, he sticks to it. They instead pull an Uno reverse card on the science wibbly and make things on Voyager kaboom, causing B'Elanna to eat some lightning and have a bit of a nap. She needs medical attention, so it's probably just as well that Bajoran Boss intends to kidnap her. The doc's not sure about this decision, but that doesn't stop it from happening, and we leave him to deal with his patient, as this story is to be continued. Well then, some actual continuity. A surprise to be sure, but not an unwelcome one. We're following the events of Killing Game from back in Season 4, where Janeway gave holographic technology to the Hirogen. I recorded the original gift as a maybe under the Captain Janeway list of Prime Directive fuckery, as while it has the potential to impact their natural development, it was requested by one of their leaders before his death. Of all the shit she's pulled, this is probably one of the times where she has a decent counterpoint. And, as I noted back then, holographic tech isn't inherently a weapon. This isn't like giving someone a gun. A more apt analogy would be that we gave them the means to make steel. Steel can create buildings and cars and cutlery and railway tracks. Steel creates the tools to make all of those things too. So how much responsibility do we carry that steel can also be used to make guns? At what point does somebody get to wash their hands of unintended consequences? What percentage of probability that something bad will happen makes you culpable for the event? Can that even be measured? Most people would say placing a hammer on a table isn't inherently dangerous. What if the table is in a kindergarten? What if we didn't know it was a kindergarten? Black and white can very quickly become shades of grey. The Prime Directive's stated goal of non-interference exists for a reason, and that reason is because intent and impact are two different things. Janeway's wish to help save the Hirogen species may ultimately have proliferated the very means of their destruction onto their ships. But even then, is it really her fault? She was asked for assistance by someone who was reasonable and rational, someone with a comparable level of scientific advancement, someone who wanted to use the technology to save his people. Is it fair to suggest Janeway should have refused based on the likelihood that some members of his species would abuse it? Would we deny people blankets because they could be used to strangle someone? I've said before that Trek often glosses over the consequences of actions. One of Season 4's highlights, Hope and Fear, is memorable largely because it explores this, showing the harm caused by Janeway's interference in the conflict between Borg and Number species. Seeing how another decision of hers has turned out for those involved is a welcome sight, and a reminder that sometimes there are no right answers. Before we go, I want to have a little gloat over Bajoran Boss asking the Doc if he has his own quarters. That's been a particular bugbear of mine for several seasons now, as there was never really an adequate reason for it not happening in my eyes. It's satisfying to see that somebody on the writing team hadn't forgotten it either, and used it as a pretty solid example of the ways in which the Doc is treated differently, even by the person he credits with giving him the freedoms he has. End of episode. Sorry, no Space Dog this week as we've got some admin to do. The poll for which Trek we visit next is now closed, and I can confirm that the winner, if you call having the piss taken out of you winning, is Deep Space Nine. My thanks to all patrons who voted. There may be a brief hiatus while we switch from Voyager to Deep Space Nine, as I'll have some stuff to set up, but it won't be more than a week or so, as the algorithm, blessed be its unknowable calculations, will bury me if I'm away for too long. A reminder, too, that if the series you were hoping for didn't win, then barring natural disaster or the need to get a proper job, we'll eventually end up doing it at some point, so don't worry. End of admin.